You're listening to Experience Imagination, a themed entertainment design podcast presented by Falcon's Creative Group. Every episode, we discuss a new topic with a panel of creative professionals. Hi, I'm Cecil McPuri, President and Chief Creative Officer of Falcons.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Experience Imagination. I'm Abhinav Narayan, your moderator for the episode. For today's discussion, I sat down with Creative Director Mike Wallace and our Associate Creative Director, Stephen Ricker, to talk a little bit about the art of master planning, the start of the design process, and how we even begin to wrap our heads around creating such vast spaces when you're staring at a blank, empty space on a page. Let's go ahead and jump into that episode, and I'll let them start by introducing themselves.
Hi there, I'm Stephen Ricker, I'm Associate Creative Director here at Falcon's Treehouse.
And I'm Mike Wallace, Creative Director here at Falcons.
Stephen, you wrote an article recently for the Falcons blog on the nature of open space and kind of the start of the design process, and that got us thinking about what is usually one of the first things that we do in a lot of our projects, and that is the master planning process. It's often the pioneering phase that kicks us off in a lot of different directions for a lot of different things that we do. How do you start working with an empty space? What is the first step?
Well, I mean, that's where we begin is what is our boundary? What are our limitations? What is the only information that we have, and how do we fill in the blanks from there?
And we're talking physical boundaries and also financial boundaries. That's a big one.
Of course.
Oh, yeah.
Conceptual, storytelling boundaries too. Where do we want to go? Is this, high thrills, high action, or is this all family?
Yeah.
Younger audiences.
The interesting thing that I always find with master planning is that it's simultaneously really easy on its surface and probably the most difficult thing that we have to do at the same time. Because you can start just like you would any other drawing or sketch or space or anything like that. You're going to start just loosely sketching stuff in. I'm going to put a bubble here and a bubble there. And does this park or attraction want to be hub and spoke design? Does it want to be a loop design? Does it want to be something else? And then layer upon layer of more information gets on top of that. You understand your metrics for circulation widths. You understand how big an attraction box has to be. You understand how big an F&B or a retail space needs to be and how frequently they are positioned in a master
start
plan.
Understanding what the park owner's capacity goals are. How many people do they want to attend in a year, in a day?
Yeah, all those things that unfortunately don't usually come into your mind until you've iterated master plans hundreds and hundreds of times.
So that kind of leads into my next question. What are your top priorities when you are creating a master plan? You mentioned capacity, food and beverage, all of these things like that. How do you balance these top priorities?
Top priority is always guest experience.
Yeah.
Whatever the guest experience wants to be, and Stephen touched on it earlier, is it thrill, is it family, is there some particular fantasy or story that we want to tell? But how the space contributes to that guest experience. Am I going to align people's view to a certain thing? Am I going to move them through this type of space and constrict their viewpoint and then open it back up again? All of that narrative starts in plan and starts...
And the functionality of how guests move through the space. Guests in large groups start to move as a liquid or, like a highly viscous magma or lava where bigger groups tend to clump together and slow down where you can compress it through a small area where people tend to move more quickly.
A really interesting visual, thinking of it like that, kind of like seeping, slow moving.
Yeah, the floor is in fact lava.
And then there's the whole component of compression and decompression and how both of those have a different feel that caters the story in a different way.
Right, we always have to play with juxtaposition between, compression, decompression, excitement and thrill and, relaxation and, a myriad of other things because there's no mountains without the valleys.
We also tend to deal with spatial constraints vertically in a master plan.
Right,
which is
height.
It's an odd thing to know that we're building a 400-foot tall mountain peak, but we're building it at 100-foot height. So the way we expose that to people completely controls their feeling of it, how close they think it is to them, how tall they really think it is. So, I mean, those kinds of things are able to be messed with when you get into this idea of funneling people into narrower and lower ceilinged environments and then opening them up into a big vista.
Well, and one of my favorite things to play with, too, is the verticality of the master plan. Put people on different levels, look down and look up at it,
different
at each other.
Viewpoints of various pieces, yep.
As you've gone through this process of iterating hundreds upon hundreds of master plans, have you found that there is generally a oh, whenever guests interact with this kind of ride system or this kind of amenity, it's usually better to do this type of space, or does it truly depend on the story?
It usually depends on the story. There are very few times when a ride system is going to dictate what the space leading up to it or after it is. The few instances of that where I can see that happening are if it's a really, really high or really, really low capacity attraction, then you need to plan for bigger plaza type things out in front. Or if it's a
People waiting or high thrill,
there's
not
a decision
everybody-
point,
Yeah.
right? Grandma and the little kids have to wait outside while everybody else goes on the
So
ride.
you'll need more seating, more waiting area.
Yeah.
Is there a particular pattern of compression or decompression that works leading up on the path to the bathrooms or to the food court or something?
Well, the good thing about stuff like restrooms is it's a necessity, so you can put them out of the way and people will find them no matter what.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
My favorite thing is to always make sure that we include fun, niche little details on those paths that are hidden.
Yeah.
You know, Epcot World Showcase is a prime example of this. Everybody's so familiar with the main path that runs out in front of all the countries. Every one of those countries has such a rich depth to it if you actually walk all the way to the back of it, but nobody ever does unless they're going to that last restroom or that very far retail or food service thing. So
Let's talk a little bit about flow. You're trying to make sure that guests feel the way you want them to feel as they're moving through this current space. But you also have to keep in mind how they are traveling from one space to another, what that experience is like, and how they know that they need to go there.
So there's two schools of thought on this. The old way, the Walt Disney, there's the thing in the distance that I see and I have to get to.
The weenie?
The weenie in the distance, yeah. That was the
Excuse
Walt
the expression.
the Walt idea. His philosophy was he always wants you to see the next thing and be encouraged to leave the space that you're in. The paradigm shift that happened at Universal Studios when the first Harry Potter land was built, the first like big primetime example that I can think of it, was complete and total immersion in a land where you couldn't see, hear, feel anything
else that was out
outside
there.
of the world that we wanted to design for you. That, surprisingly enough, encouraged people to stay there longer, spend more money, generally review it better, more positively.
And theory, if you are naturally more inclined to stay in that position, you might feel more comfortable exploring and seeking out
You're not
new
rushing
areas
through.
that are not immediately there.
Right. That's the big overall picture.
Yeah.
When you talk about flow on a smaller scale, there's a fine point to be had in a retail shop, for example. Again, I'll use Potter as an example just because I was familiar with it. There was a point where those very, very tiny retail shops hit a perfect balance of crowding where we sold so much more merchandise. And it was this
There's like this peak
Well, it
threshold.
was. It's this balance between there's people here who are going to buy the thing that I want,
Yeah.
and there's so many people here that I can't move and I want to leave.
You've got them captured, but
Yeah.
they also...
So there's a way to think about it that way too. There's a balance where in certain environments you want people to feel a little claustrophobic, or you want a lot of people to experience the same thing at the same time.
Do you want them to stay there? Do you want them to move elsewhere? Where do you want them to go?
So let's jump back for a second, back to the blank canvas. What do you use for inspiration to like jumpstart the creative process there? Are you looking at reference photos of how you want it to look like from a guest perspective? Are you looking at plans that exist previously? Are you reading something? Are you just like closing your eyes, listening to some obscure soundtrack and imagining it in your head? What's that process?
There's kind of two divergent parts that kind of happen simultaneously. It's music and lyrics happening at the same time.
That's a good comparison.
Yeah, it's we start kind of bubbling out just based on whatever tract of land we have access to spatially. Okay, this is a good chunk. This is a good chunk, and these chunks together, and this is how they work. But what is the story that's binding them all together?
Yeah.
And that helps really drive what things start to be populated.
You usually end up with 4 or 5 layers of things with varying transparencies all underneath the layer you're drawing on to get you the final product.
One thing that I want to talk about, Stephen, in your article, you mentioned the part of the creative process that is finding problems and embracing him. Like you had a quote, if you can't hide it, embrace it. So I want to talk a little bit about the act of problem solving in a design. And like, sometimes it may be a blank sheet of paper that you're looking at, but you know that there is a giant hole or a giant column or a giant pillar that you can't remove. How do you embrace that? What is the problem solving process like there?
Well, there was one conceptual master plan I had worked on a while back for a client overseas that had a 20-meter gorge run through the exact center of the land, which was oblong shaped and not ideal. So, when you face a situation like that, you can't hide it. You can't fill it in. It's not economical. You just have to embrace the verticality of it, start tiering things, and, really use those sight lines to your advantage.
Yeah, you have to look at things from how can I use this unfortunate circumstance to make this place unique. It's really down to, okay, if I can figure out a way to make all this stuff fit into this little box or make this entire park exist along a cliff face, whatever the situation is, I mean, the chances are nobody's done it before. People may not get an opportunity to do it anytime soon.
Yeah.
So you now have this beautiful, unique thing that's under your belt.
What has been your favorite surprise in that process?
For me, it's usually just about getting somebody else's eyes on the thing for the first time. Like, I would much rather have a half-baked master plan get put under the nose of a writer or a concept artist or somebody else, a 3D modeler, let's say, and have them have their take on that version of it while I continue to flesh it out in my direction, what I had in my head. And then looking at the two of those things after a day or two and seeing the way they took it and the way I took it, there's almost always some cool discovery in that exchange that then gets folded back into the final piece.
It becomes greater than any...
the sum of its parts.
Right, exactly. Any of our individual contributions.
Right. And if you ever feel like you're stuck, especially in this iterative world of planning, master planning, and layout design, this kind of stuff, the best thing to do is go put it in front of somebody else or sit with somebody else and have them see it for the first time and critique it. One of the
amount of times somebody goes, oh, well, what about that? And points to something small that just changes everything fundamentally for the better. It's
like the first time, you had an architecture professor in school that would turn your drawing upside down and be like, well, what about this? And you go, oh, man.
I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between the master planning process and configuring it to the specific requirements of the region or the culture or even the venue.
Yeah. There are so many considerations to be taken in that regard. From a master planning standpoint, when we're first looking at it, it's usually best guess. It's, have we had enough experience up to this point to give it a good run? Then invariably you'll find out that there's a unique seismic load or a ridiculous wind load or something else. There's materials that aren't available in the region that you're working in, or there's something that can't...
code that can't be on a certain entertainment product can't be on a certain floor in this region.
Yeah,
we've had that one before.
And I mean, weather and climate can be such a huge part. Are you
building somewhere with a sandstorm? Are you building somewhere that it rains 4 hours a day? Are you building somewhere
that's covered in ice for 6 months?
Right. Do you want to have a complete outdoor park inside? These are all things that are asked of us frequently.
Are there any other considerations with master planning that we haven't talked about yet?
One of the things that's most important, I guess, when you're looking at master planning from a holistic view and this iteration conversation that we keep coming back to, I always tell people who are learning about this industry or trying to get into this industry to diversify their skill set. The way that applies to master planning is getting an understanding of other disciplines and how they're going to impact your space. So knowing what a roller coaster needs from a clearance standpoint, knowing a little bit about structure and fabrication techniques and the amount of backspace you have to allow for this type of wall, the amount of landscape buffer that works for sight block versus audio block, that kind of thing. All of that can be gained from just talking to people who you work with. Somebody in your office in a themed entertainment design type of capacity is an audio engineer, is an AV engineer, is a structural engineer. These guys have this information. You just have to go and ask about it. And for the first 150,000 iterations, you go and ask. And then for the next 100,000, you're pretty good on your own.
Right. And I think something we haven't quite touched on yet is the operational necessities of the park.
Right. Back of house. If you
That's
have-
heavy.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, one thing that I keep thinking about through this conversation is I don't know why I keep going here, but I keep thinking of water. Because in master plans, whether it's fountains or rivers that are part of the scenic
Or the
theming,
flow of the people.
or or as the flow
Metaphorically,
the flow of the people, or if it's an aquarium with actual
There's that.
water and creatures whose lives depend on it, something as simple as that element is now a whole other dimension of consideration that needs to go into this type of master plan.
Right. I mean, we talk a lot about the guest experience and the guest flow, which is, first and foremost, the most important part. But the back of house operational needs has to flow and have that same functionality. And oftentimes the two cannot see each other.
Right.
Yeah. The quickest way to make sure that something cool that you designed gets scrapped is to make it hard to maintain or make it difficult to operate.
Or difficult to reach, even.
Yeah. I mean, and those are considerations that you'll learn after time, that while the guest experience is first and foremost, that's the primary thing you're trying to drive, your client isn't really the owner and it isn't really the guest. Your client is operations and tech services.
Yeah.
Because if you don't make it for them, it doesn't run.
Yeah.
Those are the people who, make it run day in, day out for years.
Are there new technologies or new sciences out there that are changing the way that you approach master planning at all?
I think there are certainly new technologies that are making it easier to convey what we have in our heads. The onset of the quick 3D massing programs, the SketchUps of the world,
Rhino and...
Yeah, those guys. That makes it very quick to loft up some things and understand the relationship of this size to that size and whatnot. And you can get your point across through a couple of renderings.
And what it looks like from a guest's POV as well.
Now that's moving into VR, where not only can I build a ridiculously beautiful and detailed 3D model of the space that I want to create, I can put a headset on you and put you right in the middle of it.
And you can feel that compression, that decompression. You can feel the general space.
But for all the struggles that we used to have trying to explain to financiers or owners or operators what a space was going to be like, the easiest way is just, here, put this on, I'll put you in it. Yeah. Now you'll understand.
Yeah, so many times we do that and we get the reaction of, now I get it.
You know, the picture was worth 1,000 words. This immersive video is millions of words. The stories I always liked are about what happened when nobody was doing this yet. You know, you talk about Walt and the weenie in the distance and all that stuff. Nobody knew how to lay out a theme park prior to Disneyland.
Right.
So somebody came up, I've heard this story a handful of times. Somebody came up to Walt and said, well, where do we put the trash cans? So Walt said, I don't know, let me tell you. He went to a hot dog cart, got a hot dog, started eating it as he walked away. And when he finished the hot dog, he balled up the paper and went, trash can should be here.
Nice.
It's like, that's brilliant. But you have no idea that that's the kind of nonsense that went on in the early days.
And it speaks to the necessity of role-playing that is always in this design process.
Absolutely. There's that necessity to role play with things that you wouldn't normally think of, like, okay, where do I put the trash cans? Where would I ball up my trash and walk away? It's, I'm starting to get tired walking around here. All right, I'm going to sit here. All right, what am I looking at while I'm sitting here? Do I want to go buy something after I've sat here a while and I'm feeling inspired?
There's the epic, dramatic side of master planning. I'm going to put a mountain here. I'm going to put a volcano here. I'm going to put a giant dinosaur here. And then there's the not so sexy stuff of like, where are they going to put their strollers? Where are they going to pick up a cab or get an Uber? Where are they going to park? But that is a whole other consideration, kind of similar to the back of house conversation that we were having.
It's across the board the art of minimizing frustration. I don't want to have it be a problem to go to the restroom, get a drink, get an umbrella, get a poncho if it's raining, find a place to park my stroller. None of that. I just want it to make sense when I step foot into a space.
The experience should not be a chore.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining me.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Thanks again to Mike and Stephen for joining us. If you'd like to read Stephen's blog article or any of the other blog articles that our team is contributing, head on over to our website at falconscreativegroup.com. You can also send us an email if you have any questions, thoughts, or ideas for future episodes at podcast@falconscreativegroup.com. Again, that's podcast@falconscreativegroup.com. And with that, we'll see you in the next episode.
This has been Experience Imagination. For more information about this episode's discussion, be sure to visit our blog at falconscreativegroup.com. And don't forget to follow Falcons Creative Group on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram.